You're very lucky. That is what's referred to as a whisper of love, a whisper of hate. You win. Casino Royale. James Bond's first adventure. When Ian Fleming wrote this book, he set out to try to write a spy novel to end all spy novels. And here's a bit of an interesting fact for you. So, Ian Fleming was a very big ornithologist, which means he was really big into birds. And probably his most cherished piece of literature he had on the subject was Birds of the West Indies by James Bond. Now, that's not the only reason Ian chose this name. It was because he wanted it to be something rather vague and unassuming, much like how some people would use the name John Smith. He wanted, instead, the miraculous adventures he went on to be the interesting part rather than his name. The book itself starts out already mid-adventure. He is already at the title casino, looking over the place, trying to figure out where his opponent, Le Chiffre, could easily steal some money. After a thorough inspection of the casino, he realizes that an outright robbery of the place is just not going to happen. With this, he goes up to his room, does a thorough inspection, and doesn't see any of it has been tampered with. As he goes to draw himself a bath, he reflects on how he got into this situation in the first place. It was just a typical day at the office, filing through a whole bunch of paperwork, when he got a phone call from his superior officer, simply known as M. M gets this file from Station S, which is basically in charge of all the documents. And their main thing is to fight against the communist regime, the USSR at the time. File is on a mysterious character known as Le Chiffre. He's a bit of an enigmatic character, in all honesty. He was found somewhere to have a case of amnesia, which a lot of people think that he just kind of made up for the sake of going off the grid. He does say he had some vague memories of Alsace-Lorraine. I hope I'm saying that right, as, well, that's where my dad's side of the family comes from. It's a small little area that borders between France and Germany, and between the world wars, as well as other historical events. It's been French at some points, and it's been German at some points. I think now it is in French territory. The main reason he went with the name Le Chiffre is because there was no name given on his passport. It was only just a number. And so, his calling card has always been something to do with numbers, like a cipher, because that was all his name ever was. After World War II, he was picked up by the Russians, where he was head of the finance committee. He was trying his best to try to get some money with a prostitution ring. Now, a lot of people may wonder why he didn't go with something else. Well, the Chiffre has quite a weakness for the ladies, and that's the main reason he wanted to open a whole bunch of whorehouses. It would have been a pretty sound investment, too. However, France shortly outlawed all prostitution, and all his funds dried up. Now, obviously, the Russians are not too happy about this, and they sent a ruthless agent from the Smersh department. Now, Smersh is actually a combination of two words, Smites Burnham, which I believe is Russian for death to spies, or at least that's what the book says. If you know Russian, feel free to correct me on that. Now, there's one major reason I want to bring this up. On the back of the cover here, you see that he is going against Smersh, and that it is an acronym. This is not correct. Did they even read the book? But I digress. Le Chiffre does not know that Smersh has put a hit out on him, and is desperately trying to raise funds to be able to get back all the money that he lost in the prostitution ring. So in order to make up these funds, Le Chiffre is going to Casino Royale, which is in France. They are known for some very high-stakes betting, and this is just the place Le Chiffre needs to go to. Now, the plan from Station S is to send MI6's best card player and a means to be able to humiliate Le Chiffre, as well as create quite a big dent of morale against the communist side. Now you may be thinking to yourself, why not just outright kill Le Chiffre? Well, if they just left him alone, Smersh would do that for them, and that's not really going to do anything in terms of the war against communism. If they can humiliate him, then they humiliate the communists in Russia as well. So, James Bond is sent up to M's office, and they go over the details of the case. Bond is a little hesitant at first, but M does give him his blessings. Bond is given money from the Treasury Department, and if needed, they can forward him several more millions of dollars to be put into this high-stakes game. Along the way, he is also going to work with a longtime companion known as Mathis, a spy on the French side of things that Bond has worked several times for. Now, Bond's cover, he's going to keep the name, but he's going to be a wealthy Jamaican who is just simply going around just to have a fun time with his father's money. The cover doesn't stick for very long, so Bond is in his hotel room just kind of getting ready for the day when there is a knock at the door. Mathis comes in carrying a small little radio. Before Bond says anything, he just simply goes, and then he turns on the little device, to which it emits a very loud squeaking noise, to which Bond is wondering what in the world is going on, to which Mathis says, "Your room has been booked. Upstairs is the Munts, a couple that has been listening to you ever since you got here." What I did is just simply told them that we know and that we're listening as well. While the Muntses are getting their hearing together, Mathis says that they sent over a person from Station S to make sure that this plan is going into action. After all, it was their department that came up with the assignment, and they want to make sure that everything is going to end up all right. To which Bond is like, "So, who are they going to send?" To which Mathis says, "Oh, she's quite a doll, actually. A woman. Not a woman. I don't work well with women." Then kind of goes into detail as to why Bond hates women. He sees them more as a tool for pleasure rather than something that you can work with. Yeah, it was the 50s. You should be expecting there'd be a little bit of misogyny there. But anyway, Bond decides to meet Mathis for lunch, as well as meet this mysterious Miss Lind. Now, the lunch seems to be going all right, when all of a sudden, the back window explodes open. Now, you can tell that Bond and Mathis have been at this for a while, as their first instinct is, instead of to run like the rest of them, they decide to investigate where this explosion was. Bond then finds two rather mysterious-looking gentlemen wearing straw hats. Each of them is wearing a camera around their neck. One is blue, and the other is red. They spot Bond when all of a sudden the explosion goes off, completely destroying the two assassins in one fell swoop. If it wasn't for a tree that Bond used for cover, he would have been dead right along with them. Now, it's rather interesting to hear in this section that Bond was actually feeling a little woozy after this, seeing like all the bits and pieces start raining down from these people. He was just about to start wrenching when Mathis came in and tried to console him. They meet up at the hotel room, and there are no serious injuries. Just a little bit of hurt to the psyche is all. So that night, Bond goes to dinner with Miss Lind. In there, she is able to tell Bond what exactly happened. So, the third assassin was able to get away all right, but he was furious when he realized that two of his companions blew up in the accident. So, they were hired by an exterior guy. No one that could be really traced with the chief. The plan was, the red one was a smoke bomb, and the blue one was a regular bomb. They were supposed to throw the regular bomb first, and then the smoke bomb. They threw the smoke bomb, however, they didn't realize that both of them were just actually bombs. So the idea was that they would complete the job, and then there would be no evidence left afterwards. So the third guy gave all this information away. And there is a little bit of chemistry starting to bloom between Vesper and Bond. However, Bond is very much a man of his work. He starts to see himself getting a little involved with Vesper and just immediately cuts it off for the sake of the assignment. Instead, he starts to go into the details of the game, which is Baccarat. I read this passage several times, and I'm still a little fuzzy as to how the rules of Baccarat work. As well as I could gather, the royalty is worth nothing. The ace is worth 1, and then the numbers are worth their face value. Each player is given 2 cards, and the object of the game is to try to get 9. 9 is an immediately winning hand, much like how blackjack is in, well, blackjack. Just like in blackjack, you can ask for another card if you don't have enough. However, you're not allowed to take an extra card if you have a 5, or 2 cards that add up to 5. So if it's the case that you have a 10 and a 3, then your hand is worth 3, and then you can ask for another card. While there is a bit of a coldness, Bond still insists on paying for Vesper's meal, seeing that she probably hadn't been spoiled for a little while. And on top of that, with Bond being out on the road, food and drink is really the only pleasure that he really has in this line of work. So he loves to be able to have the best that he can, as well as to be able to share it with some company, which is not something he's able to do very often. So before the game begins, he bumps into a CIA agent known as Felix Leiter, a friendly enough Texan who has short blonde hair. They talk for a little while, and since they're both in the same line of work, there is a mutual understanding between the two. However, there is also a little bit of a rivalry, as they're both completely different countries vying for success. However, Leiter realizes how important this is and pledges his allegiance to Bond's side just to make sure that this Le Chiffre can be embarrassed. Bond is flattered, but he doesn't really have a whole lot he can do with him other than just make sure that Vesper is alright. He then orders a drink. Now, what is this drink? It's a bit of an invention of his, one that he hasn't been able to come up with a name for yet. So from there, the game begins. It's a lot of back and forth at the beginning, not really any clear-cut winners and not really any clear-cut losers. But as the night progresses, Bond loses it all. He just stares there completely dumbfounded, trying to wonder how in the world he's going to explain this to his superiors. Just then, he receives a mysterious envelope full of enough money to be able to continue the game. And it said right on the bottom, "With regards, from the CIA." So with this, Bond continues the game. However, one of Le Chiffre's 2 guards that he always carries with him does not take kindly to this. He sneaks up behind him with a cane and says, "This is a gun. You leave the table by the count of 10, or I will open fire." He gets to about 6 before Bond leaps into action. He flips over real quickly on the chair, smashing the guy behind him, as well as dropping the cane. As this game had been going on for several hours, it makes sense that he'd be a little more on the faint side of things. The casino was a little embarrassed at this because it was quite a high-stakes table that they were at. However, the cane is given to Felix for inspection, and Bond goes back to the table where he eventually defeats Le Chiffre at the game. With the job well done, Bond goes with Vesper to have breakfast. I'd say it's a little too late for dinner, but it's probably a little too early for breakfast as it's about 3 in the morning at this case. Anyway, they have this meal together when Bond orders this mysterious drink again. Now, something I forgot to mention about the first meal they had. Miss Lind reveals what her first name is, Vesper, to which Bond actually gives a bit of a chuckle, wondering why in the world did they name her that. To which Vesper, having been asked this question so many times, is just like, It was born during a rainy night, like when Vespers are playing, and that's the name that stuck. You gotta be like the 10 billionth person I've had to tell this story to. So, with that name Vesper, he thinks that it would be perfect for his drink that he made up. Vesper says, "You can have the name just as long as I can get a sip of it first." She does, and she enjoys it. They get on with their meal when all of a sudden one of the porters from the back gives her a slip of paper. She reads it aloud and it says, "Oh, it's from Mathis. He's just outside." At first, Bond is just kind of sitting there, slowly drinking, slowly eating a little more, when he immediately puts together that this is very unlike Mathis. If Mathis was around the corner, he would have just come right in. So he runs as fast as he can outside to just barely see Vesper being taken in a citron. The only thing she is able to do is throw out her evening bag, which has the note as well as some of her personal effects. Bond wastes no time as he takes his Bentley, which he is lucky stars that he drove over to the casino, to chase after the citron. It's a high-speed chase for a while when the citron pulls a mysterious lever in the back, and all of a sudden this large carpet full of spikes falls right out on the road. Bond figure with the citron slowing down, they probably ducked into a side road, so he starts to slow down to look for it. He sees the carpet of spikes, but is unable to get out of the way in time. He loses control of the car, and it is completely totaled. The chief looks on from the disaster and says, "Bring him to me alive," to which they do. Bond, after a really late night of the game, being sore from the tumble, as well as probably drinking a little more than he should have, he is just exhausted at this point. So he is not really putting up a fight to be able to not go in the car. He's a little relieved to see Vesper, but he doesn't understand why she seems so mute and distant. The car drives up to the chief's private villa. It is quite a fair ways out of the way, and from how it's described, it is very much in a state of disrepair. It's still livable, but the paint is peeling off, the grass is very high, some of the brickwork is even coming undone, etc. So, Vesper and Bond are separated. However, Bond has enough energy in him to try to run after Vesper to try to get her away from the men. However, that does not happen as he gets about halfway there before he gets hit and he goes to the ground. From there, we go into the very infamous torture scene of this book. Essentially what happens is there is a wicker chair that one of the guards cuts the bottom off of, and then they strip Bond completely naked. They strap him to the back so his arms are like this and his legs are spread apart like that, being completely unable to move. And then the chief, he has a wicker rug beater. Now, I honestly had to look up a picture as to what this was. So basically, imagine a small tennis racket. So the chief just basically takes that and just repeatedly starts pounding James Bond's testicles into oblivion. Bond was slowly recounting of all the stories of torture that his fellow agents have been through. At first, it is a complete, intense pain. But then after a while, you kind of start to get used to it. You even start to almost fall in love with the captor. You even start to like the pain. And then after that, you basically just pass out, and then you don't feel any pain whatsoever. The chief wants to know, where is James Bond's money? Bond refuses to relent, and the beatings continue. After a while, Bond is like really dry in the throat, so he just barely lets out, "Drink." To which the chief is like, "Oh, well, of course, we gotta keep that mouth well lubricated." So he has a thing of coffee with him that he's been drinking to keep himself awake. But now he gives some of the coffee to Bond. Bond still doesn't say anything. Before this torture began, the chief was very direct with Bond, basically saying, "First I will torture you, and then if I don't get the information out of you, I will torture Miss Lind. If I can't get the information out of any of them, I'm going to kill both of you, and then I'm going to go somewhere else and recuperate. You see? You have not beaten me yet, Mr. Bond. There are other places that I can hide. Silly Mr. Bond. All this time you've just been playing a little game. Well, here I am, playing the real game. Now, they use a bit of a different term for that, something that's a little more on the politically incorrect side, so I'm just kind of omitting that. It gets to a point where Bond is so brutally beaten that he ends up passing out, and there's a small pool of blood right beneath him. Chief then slaps his face awake until he comes back into consciousness again, and with Bond's stubbornness to be able to say anything, the beatings continue. That is, until he just stops midway. He is looking death in the face. It is an agent of Smersh. He finally caught up with him, to which Le Chiffre tries everything he can to beg, but the mysterious Smersh agent isn't hearing it. Miraculously enough, a third eye grows in the middle of Le Chiffre's forehead, and he falls to the ground dead. The Smersh agent is wearing a silk bag over his head, except for the eyes, which Bond would wager that there is a crag-like face underneath that bag. The agent then speaks to him, saying, "You are very lucky. My orders are not to kill you. However, since you are a spy, I'm going to mark you for further purpose. Know that Smersh is only letting you go just by chance." So what he does is he takes out a stiletto knife. I'm not really sure what exactly that looks like, but I hear it is very dangerous. And then he carves SM on the back of Bond's right hand. From there, Bond basically blacks out for several days. From there, he wakes up in the hospital. With this, the nurse calls in the doctor, to which the doctor says, "Look, Mr. Bond, you're very tired, and I don't want you to waste any energy with speaking. So I'm just going to give you all the details. A farmer on his way up the road discovered your car. They went to the police station. This information then got to Mathis, who then was able to find you at the Chief's place. As for the girl, she was perfectly unharmed, and her captors were dead, much like your captor." After the meeting with the doctor, he is allowed 10 minutes with Mathis. Given his fragile state, the doctor does not want Bond to get excited. It turns out that Bond is being awarded with some of the highest praise. Mathis got a call from M himself, wanting to congratulate Bond on a job well done. In fact, even the head of Station S came out to thank him for his work. There was a little bit of talking as to what exactly happened there, as well as the carving on his hand. During this talk, Bond is really considering resigning from MI6. Basically saying when he had to kill people in the past, it was very black and white. They were evil, and he was good. However, Le Chiffre is the first time that he has seen gray in this career. He's just not really sure if he'd be able to continue on with this. The 10 minutes are up, and Mathis is out. Now, Vesper had not come for any of this time whatsoever. Once again, for fear of exciting him. But also, Vesper very much feels kind of guilty as she reasons that it's her fault that Bond got so brutally beaten. Instead, she sends flowers. This didn't last for too long as, well, Bond's literal manhood was attacked, and seeing such a feminine thing in front of him very much upsets him. So after about 3 days of him getting rid of the flowers, there were no more flowers. But after enough time, Bond does call in Vesper, where he wants to hear her side of the story, as well as seeing if his manhood is actually alive or not. The doctor said that it wasn't destroyed, but he had a very hard time believing them. So from Vesper's account, she feels so stupid for such a simple trick. And just like the doctor said, she was unmolested. She did hear Bond screaming a few times, but that's really about it. After that, she just kind of blacked out from the exhaustion. So while Bond is healing up in the hospital, Vesper is touring around all the locations of France. So then that way when they get together again, they will have some place to go. The time comes, and Vesper shows Bond to a very humble beachside cottage. However, on the way, Vesper is very uneasy as there's a big truck that she swears is following them. Which Bond is like, you're overreacting too much here. Let's pull off to the side and let's see how the driver reacts. They realized that this driver was not slowing down, but Vesper did see that he did take a peek at both of them. To which Bond said, "Would you relax? Look at the sign above us. It says there's a fruit stand ahead." Vesper is a little more relaxed, but Bond definitely takes a note of this, realizing that she is very on edge about something. They get to the humble seaside cottage, to which Vesper at first is a little embarrassed, but Bond is like, no, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want. It's away from people, I can relax, and look, I can even take a nice swim in the ocean. For the next few days, it's a little bit of on and off between passion for the both of them. At first, it feels like they are really starting to connect when Vesper says, "Not now." Then the day comes and they make sweet, passionate love to each other. However, this is rather underscored by a mysterious phone call that Vesper made just outside of the villa. Bond wants to figure out what that phone call was about. Vesper is being adamant about not saying a thing about it. The next day, a mysterious customer comes by, basically a middle-aged watch dealer who has a patch over one eye. Now, unlike most patches which are held together with a piece of string, this one is more like a monocle in the idea it's like held in there just from his eye. Vesper is immediately terrified at this guy, to which she goes up to a room and hides there for the rest of the day. Bond asks their host what exactly is the deal with that guy, to which their host is like, it's just a middle-aged watch dealer from Switzerland. Bond decides to do a little bit of a background check. The story completely checks out. He's a watch dealer, he's from Switzerland, and even the car that he was driving was legally purchased. Bond just kind of took it up to some hard nerves. However, he did not mention the fact to Vesper that he'd be back within a few more days for another meal. From there, the relationship gets very rocky. Eventually, they do have another night of sweet, passionate love before the mysterious man comes back. And there, Vesper tries to let out a few little details, but not really a whole lot that sticks. They have one more night of sweet, passionate love. And the next day, Vesper is found dead, and the host gives him the suicide note. It turns out that Vesper was actually a double agent working for the Russians. This is something that she wanted out of, but nobody ever truly escapes the long arm of Smersh. Up to the point they got to the villa, she had been giving intelligence to the other side until she really started to fall in love with Bond. And there she refused to give any information. However, Smersh sent the Swiss watch dealer as a way of saying, "We mean business. Give us your information, or we will kill you." To which Vesper saw the only way out was to just kill herself. In the letter, she leaves some contact information as to where she went to for her information. There's not really a whole lot to go on, but Bond gives this information to his superior officer, or at least a liaison, as it's not really something you can just call up directly. Now at this point, Bond has given up on this whole moral gray area of the job, and has decided that it's people like this that are pure evil. While the letter was very much written with love, it turns to complete hate, knowing how many people must have died at the hands of Vesper. And so he redoubles his efforts to taking down Smersh. And he even tells his superior about the mole they had, to which the person at the other end is like, "Had? Yes, the witch is dead." However, Bond used some more colorful language. Now you're probably wondering how the book compares with the movie. So it is also mentioned in the book that in order to be a double O agent, you have to have 2 confirmed kills, which one of them was a very nice, clean kill. Basically, it was in New York City trying to take down a Japanese cipher clerk. He was with another agent, and they had to snipe the counter agent through a very thick window. So the first agent had to fire a bullet to get the hole through, then Bond had to fire the second bullet to kill this clerk. The second one was not so pretty. The only thing he had was a knife and his hands, and it took a very long time for him to die. Now, because they updated the movie to a more modern time period, the fall of the USSR kind of ruins the idea of SMERSH. So instead, the chief is more like an investing consultant. Basically, the head of a Uganda resistance is giving his money to the chief in order to create some more money for their revolutionary cause. The idea is that this money, instead of being invested in whorehouses, was going to be invested in this airline. So the chief was going to destroy an experimental airplane from this airliner. The stocks would go through the floor, and then the chief would make a ton of money. However, Bond foiled that plan. And I do like the idea that, maybe it's just me, but the idea that the agent that was sent to blow up the plane exploded, it very much makes me think of the 2 men in straw hats. As for the casino itself, instead of being in France, it is in Montenegro instead. As for the game itself, the movie goes for Texas Hold'em, which this is a change I could very much get behind because, as I mentioned, I had a very hard time figuring out the rules of Baccarat. And on top of that, I think Texas Hold'em is just a lot more interesting in terms of watching it. Unlike the book where Le Chiffre didn't know that the SMERSH agents were after him, in the movie, one of the Ugandan resistance movement members knows that Le Chiffre has no money, and he attempts to get it. There is a bit of a tussle where Bond ends up killing this resistance member. Now, it creates a very touching scene in the movie, as this is the first time Vesper has ever seen a body before. Which, that, I'd say, is a pretty big departure from the book, as I feel like Vesper probably would have seen some action as opposed to the Vesper in the movie. Just like in the book, it is up to Felix to bail out Bond to be able to continue the game. However, it's interesting that Felix just kind of pops up out of nowhere in the movie, while in the book, Bond already knew him and had already created quite a rapport with him already. Now, instead of the cane gun, Bond is poisoned in the movie, which honestly I think this makes a little more sense, as it really kind of shows how exhausted Bond would be after such an evening. Well, in the book, it is more he just had a little too much to drink after all the excitement. So in both, Bond is flooring it trying to catch up with Vesper. However, in a twist, instead of a carpet of spikes, it is Vesper herself that causes the crash. Now, the other big departure as well is that after Bond is taken out of the wreckage, Le Chiffre says that Mathis was on Le Chiffre's side, rather than Vesper being the traitor. I'm not entirely sure why they changed this, but, well, he was originally French in the book, and I kind of thinking he's a bit more on the Spanish side in the movie. Now, as for the famous torture scene, it has a very similar sentiment to it. However, I would love to imagine Mads doing the way it was in the book, how he's just kind of talking to Bond as if he's just a little child that wandered a little too far into the neighbor's flower garden. But as is, the movie does this perfectly. Now, I've been a little hot and cold on Daniel Craig's performance as Bond, but he nails this torture sequence. And I heard the same exact moans and grunts as I was reading the book. Obviously, the major departure between the torture scene is, as opposed to being in a villa, it's more like the Saw's low rent trap area, and instead of a wicker carpet beater, it is a knotted rope. I'm sure both would be painful, but I feel like if you're gonna go with rope, you should have went with the kind that's really splintery. Oh, I guess I just kind of made it a little darker there, didn't I? Now, the Haze of Memories is about the same in both. The only major difference from there is that instead of Bond getting to the villa to make out with Vesper, he makes out in the hospital room. I feel like that kind of underplays the seriousness of his injuries, and in the book it was kind of a motif of Bond wondering if he was really truly a man anymore. And then in the movie, instead of them going to a private villa, they decide to go to Italy instead. The man with the eye patch is still there, and the story is pretty similar. However, instead of a suicide note, Bond gets all this information from M as to why she did it. And on top of that, I think it's a fair bit more tragic in the movie because Bond could have actually saved her, but he had to slowly sit there and watch as Vesper drowned. He even tried to save her life, but it was too late. And just like the book, he had a very hard time coming to grips with this. And then for the ending, now it is very different in both. So in the movie, it is the death of Vesper that has him go on a revenge mission against Le Chiffre's boss, Mr. White. In the book, Bond was very much so betrayed that Vesper was working for the communist side that he did not want to rest until the world was safe from such evil. And I also find it interesting that this was foreshadowed a little bit, as when Bond is discussing the idea of good and evil with Mathis, Bond says, "What does pure evil look like?" To which Mathis says, "A woman." Once again, a lot of people would probably read misogyny into that, but I think that is foreshadowing into Vesper's betrayal. Now, the last thing to note, it's really quite interesting, as Casino Royale was the first book, but Dr. No is the first one in terms of the cinematic Bond. As such, there are a few little elements from Casino Royale that sneak into Dr. No. For instance, the scene of Bond checking his hotel room. It is verbatim, as it is described in Casino Royale. And on top of that, I can't believe it's coincidence that they introduce Bond while playing a game of Baccarat. So yes, that is Casino Royale. Join me next time where we go for the second book, Live and Let Die. Maybe it's just me, but I love the Signet covers a lot more than whatever this was. Until next time, keep having fun.